But we are here today to attend the talk by Professor Sandro Carrara from EPFL Lausanne. As you can see, the title is Bio-Nano CMOS Interface for Remote Monitoring of Human Metabolism. So Professor Sandro Carrara is an IEEE Fellow of the IEEE Sequencing Systems Society. He's also the recipient of IEEE Sensor Council Technical Achievement Award. He is professor at the EPFL in Lausanne, Switzerland, and head of the BioCMOS Interface Lab. He holds a PhD in biochemistry and biophysics, a master's degree in physics, and a diploma in electronics. His scientific interests are on electrical phenomena of nanobiostructure films and include CMOS design of biochips based on protein and DNA. Along his career, he published 7 books, close to 400 publications, and a large number of patents, 17 patents. He has been appointed IEEE Distinguished Lecturer of the CASS Society in 2012. His works received several international recognition as best cited papers and best conference papers. So it's just a short CV, because the full CV of Sandra is quite large. And if you read for you all the CV, we are not going to have time for his talk. So thank you very much again to accept our invitation to give this talk today. So I give the floor to you to start your presentation.
Thank you so much, Ricardo, for the very nice introduction of myself. And thank you all for being with us today for the streaming of this lecture. A little note: we discovered with Ricardo we met a technical problem, so animation will be not available, and unfortunately there has been many in this presentation. So in some slide we'll probably met some little noise or problem, but I will do my best to introduce you the topic that, as Ricardo already mentioned, is in my core business. So the development, the research, and technological development of interfaces in between CMOS systems, nano structure, and biomaterials, in order to typically investigate possibility to develop new applications, new devices for application in monitoring of human metabolism in remote mode. So the reference market, if you like, is that of the personalized and precision medicine through what someone called distributed diagnostics, thanks to our personal electronics. So nowadays, all of us carry personal mobile phone and laptops, and there are already some product in the market, like this one from IBG Star, that typically allow with this plugin to insert a glucose strip in order to transform the iPhone in a glucometer. One of the latest novelty in the field is this device by the Abbott that is provided for the continuous monitoring of the glucose, that again allow the measurements of the glucose thanks to electrochemical sensor and an electronic front end, and then he has a handable interface, user interface for reading the glucose level. As you can see in this slide, in 2020 there has been a forecast that was imagine $70 billion US by 2025 by selling 3 billion wearable sensor. Actually, it seems that this forecast is confirmed because now already in 22 the selling was up to more than 61 billion. So this brings us to new forecasts, moving from 3 billion in 25 to 26 billions of connected IoT devices by 2030. That means, a lot of opportunities for companies to develop and introduce in the market new wearable devices, as well as you can imagine, for scientists, industrial and academic scientists to develop and invent new approaches, new detection methodology. And you see here in this further slide that the forecast of 61 billion device by 2030 looks like to show 3 out of 4 of the total 26 billions will be for health applications. So including, of course, monitoring of human metabolism, because human metabolism is a general frame where we can find not only information typically about patients' diseases, but we can find as well informations about the efficacy of the therapeutics. So, of course, once we will be there, or in part already along the way now, we can imagine to have, you see here in this slide, many sensors in a remote human that is typically connected through internet connectivity to all the different departments of the Medicare system, national and international system. So that means, with the hospital, with the personal doctor, with ambulances in case of urgent diseases. So, of course, this opened to plenty of opportunity to develop innovative systems, especially for the detection at molecular level, because if we want to monitor the human metabolism, we need to detect molecules dealing with the human body. For doing that, the 3 key issues are typically the integration in the system of biomolecule, because we need typically specificity. We need to develop a detector that show capability to measure, for example, only the glucose among millions of other molecules that are present in the human blood. Second issue is to have enough sensitivity, because we can have the sensor that is blind for the concentration we found in human patients. And to that aim, it's usually very useful to integrate nanostructure, to integrate nanomaterials on board of the device. And then last but not least, if we want to have automatic monitoring, if we want to have, automatized functions in our remote monitoring system, we need to develop, typically CMOS front ends in order to assure precise current, multiplexing for several metabolites, reliability, not only limited to temperature and pH. Of course, considering all this frame, I got kind of, along my career, this new idea of a co-design of the 3 layers, the layer of bio, nano, and CMOS. And I have also published kind of 10 years ago, last edition went out right this year, the second edition of a book in bio-CMOS interfaces and co-design. And if you are really interested in the field of this talk, I suggest you to have a look of the content of this book. Well, of course, thinking to provide you a webinar following the invitation by Ricardo, I thought to offer you an overview on this topic. So let us now scroll a little bit one by one, the 3 key layers of the system, and see what we need in principle to develop the right bio-nano CMOS interface for application of biomonitoring. So the first issue is that to have the right selectivity. So in principle, we can measure an enormous plethora of molecules and ions. Here in the list, you see glucose, lactate, cholesterol, ATP, the entire class of drugs, therapeutic compounds, the entire class of ions that all of them may represent key information at level of the disease. For example, high level of glucose are related to diabetes, or information about how is going the therapy, because having the possibility to measure the therapeutic compounds, which means the drugs, allow us to have possibility to follow the efficacy of the therapy. So, of course, to do that, we need to be selective. That means we need to integrate in the system, for example, specific drug. In this example, I consider the case of the detection of the bensphetamine. We can do it by using a special protein family dose of the cytochrome P450. And this is done because the cytochrome P450 is a natural protein of mammalians that typically oxidize the drugs. But for doing that, it requires a coenzymes that, as you see here in this cartoon, it furnish 2 electrons. So if we furnish the electrons by the electrode of our electronic system, we are in business because we could measure a current and be quantitative on the amount of drugs in the sample. Other cases, the case of the ion, just to show you an independent case of how to provide selectivity. We can, for example, play with selective membranes, for example, for the potassium. That means we will have a membrane that is selective, allow only the potassium passing through, and then we can measure an open circuit potential over time. And then, of course, if it is changing, it is also connected to the change of the potassium. Just be aware that, as you see here in the cartoon, the measurements of the open circuit potential is not necessarily stable enough for a real application. We will see in a while a possible solution. Once we have transferred the selectivity on the system, we need to be enough sensitive. Let us consider again the case of the drug. In this example, we have the detection of the verapamil, a very well-known antihypertensive drug. But you see in this paper, a sensor has been published which detects verapamil in between 0.5 up to 3 millimolar, but the concentration in patient's blood has to be measured below 0.3 micromolar. So no chance to be in business if these are the performance of the sensor. So to improve the performance of this kind of sensors, we can, for example, as I mentioned, try to exploit nanomaterial. This is a good example. You see here, we can try to target another drug, cyclophosphamide, by using similar technology. We use the same protein family that we have used before for the other compound. But if we just immobilize the protein on bare electrode, you see this is the calibration curve, which is starting exactly where the therapeutic range found in human patients. And so once again, no way to have a real technology based on this approach. However, if we co-immobilize carbon, multi-wallet carbon nanotube in the same electrochemical interface, you see the calibration curve move from here to there, and you are now perfectly fitting the therapeutic range of the cyclophosphamide as measured in patients' blood. So we are back to business thanks to the fact that we have integrated also multi-wallet carbon nanotube, a kind of nanomaterial that improves the performance of the sensor. How to do it? Well, there are different options. We can use typically chemical vapor deposition that is typically used to grow nanostructure on top of our multi-panel system. You can see here, depending on the fact that we move from non-compact or very compact precursor film, typically done by using iron or cobalt, we can reliably grow multi-wallet carbon nanotube on the working electrode, or even graphene nanopetals, depending, starting from the same catalyst but deposited in a slightly different manner on the working electrode. Then we can grow selectively the kind of nanomaterial we desire. With this kind of nanomaterial, as you see here, also in this slide, we can highly improve the performance of sensor. In this case, is a glucose sensors. You see, with no nanomaterial, we are practically no detection, and then by an increase of the nanomaterials, in this case, nanoflowers, on top of the working electrode, you see the calibration curve goes up, and we can succeed in registering larger current per centimeter square for the same amount of the glucose. There are also other techniques to nanostructure electrode, working electrode. We can use, for example, electrochemical deposition to deposited divalent or tetravalent, to deposit nano gold and nano platinum by divalent or tetravalent salt solutions. And you can see here we can have even mixture fabrication, so deposited both nanoparticle and nanoflowers. And again, with these techniques, we avoid to use the costly chemical vapor deposition. We just use electrochemical deposition, and this became, easier to also deposit this nanomaterial directly on top of the electrode of our CMOS die. This is an example we have published on the transaction of biomedical circuit and system in 2017 in collaboration with Imperial College, the group of Pandelis Georgiou, one of my PhD students, that now she's lecturer in UCL in London too. She succeeded in depositing nano cluster of platinum. You see here every ball is filled by nano petals, and this has been done directly on a chip that has been designed by the Imperial College. I mentioned you the fact that we have non-stable open circuit potential in case of selective membrane for ions. Well, it has been demonstrated, and we also have published, that the potential became very stable if we nanostructure the working electrode, thanks, for example, to nanoplatinum or nanogold. And here you see the bright result about that. So you see there was a huge drift if the electrode has been not nanostructured. Instead, with both nanopetal and nanosphere, we have quite straightforward and very stable in time measurements of the open circuit potential, dealing with certain concentration, for example, of the ion potassium. Then what's about the electronics we need for that? Well, in this case, it's something probably you are more adapted with, being, I guess, a audience of circuit and system designer. But it is important to know that we need to offer a certain potential to the reference electrode. So if this is our amperometric sensor, we need to apply a certain potential between the working and the reference electrode. We can exploit typically operational amplifier in order to mirror, if this amplifier is not saturated, to mirror the input potential to the reference, avoiding with this connection to have current absorbed of the reference, which is a hard requirement in electrochemistry. And then the output of the control amplifier will require all the current that we might need supporting the redox reaction in the working electrode. On the other side, we need to measure the current coming from the working electrode. You remember I showed you a case where an enzyme was fed by electrons in order to transform a drug that might be our target molecule. In this case, the number of electrons our working electrode is furnishing is a measure of how much molecule are in the sample. So the current at the working electrode is measured in this interface just through a current to voltage conversion by using a transit impedance amplifier. Then we might have smarter ways to measure the output current. This is a cool idea that has been originally published by Narola and Ares in 2006 on the Sensor Journal. They propose a kind of current to frequency conversion by using a capacitor that has been charged by VDD and let him discharge through the electrochemical sensors, by then monitoring with a comparator the timing of charging and discharging. And because the discharging will be driven by the current of the biosensor, we will have then a timing of discharging that will be connected with the amount of redox reaction we have in the sensor, which is ultimately related to the amount of drug we have in the sensor. In this case, the output frequency of the switch in the comparator is directly proportional to the current at the sensor, which is directly proportional to the concentration of the glucose or of the drug you want to measure. By using similar kind of interface, we have developed an implantable device that we have implanted on a mice years ago here in EPFL. And by exploiting the current to frequency converter and a multiplexing of many sensors, pH, temperature, ATP, glucose, and paracetamol, we have then driven with the output of the current to frequency converter an extra load to an inductive link in order to have the backscattering readout of the data. So the power transfer station would fill to going in and out by the matching of the power transfer, and this frequency has been connected with the concentration, for example, of the glucose or of the drug in the mouse. Different story is the one to measure the drugs. In this case, we can do it, as I showed you, with the cytochrome P450 class of enzymes, of mammalian enzymes, but unfortunately and differently by the case of the glucose oxidase, here the enzyme is not so selective. It can sometimes detect more than one drug. In this example, it detects both naproxen and flurbiprofen, and it has been also demonstrated that if we fix the concentration, for example, of the flurbiprofen, by increasing the concentration of the other drug, the naproxen, we can keep up with the current, the Faraday current, also related to the flurbiprofen. So in this case, we need to take into account a kind of interaction between the two drugs on the same sensor, but there are methods, and we are nowadays also applying machine learning approaches to read out the right concentration of the several drugs under the same acquisition. Of course, to succeed on that, we need to have ramp generation inside the chip. Sometimes this is not so trivial, especially if we want to develop implantable devices that forest in dramatically small interfaces. But we can find solutions, for example, in the direct digital synthesis of the signal, where we can, for example, start from a digital word, and then thanks to a digital to analog converter, we can have, the typical staircase voltage ramp that is used in electrochemistry for amperometric detection. In the case of ion detection, it's easier because it's just, the measurements of a open circuit potential. We can just, compare, use a voltage follower to read this potential, and then compare by using another voltage follower with a reference electrode, and we can have very reliable detection of the pH if we use, for example, iridium oxide, or we can have similar detection of whatever ion if we use a selective membranes for potassium, sodium, and other ions like ammonium, for example. Well, by following this kind of design, in our lab, we have developed over the last, 15 to 20 years, several chips. Here you have some just example of chip that we have developed by using, for example, the UMC 018 technology or the AMS 035, which usually are more than sufficient for biomedical application, even though they are not the most advanced node in CMOS technology. And you can see here some example of the integrated potential stat we have designed. These are the performance typically compared with Autolab, that is, kind of Ferrari in electrochemistry in lab. Is a very costly device, very bulky. The cost is up to $20,000 US dollars. You see here we have get, very similar sensitivity, both in the case of glucose and lactate, by using our chip instead of the Autolab. We, of course, pay the price on the limit of detection. Our chip is more prone to collect also noise than the Autolab. We justify the difference of the price and also in the size. but of course it may be more than sufficient, for example, for the detection of glucose and lactate, because we are in the micromolar range, while typically the glucose and lactate are, physiologically speaking, in the millimolar range. Here is another example of characterization of one of our AC dedicated to the detection of drugs. In this case, we have detected another kind of anti-cancer compounds, the etoposide, and you see the etoposide return 2 peaks in cyclic voltammetry, one around 400 and the other around 600. And in both the cases, with the lab instruments and with our AC, we have collected, the current in the same position. So all of this, nano, bio, and CMOS, I have presented you to realize interface. Now let us see some example of devices for the remote monitoring in human metabolism. Of course, I'm speaking about implantable and wearable devices, and I'm going to show you some example that we have developed quite successfully over the last 15 years here in EPFL. I will present you some example of portable devices, some example of wearable, and a couple of example of implantable one. So on the side of the portable, you see here compared with the ruler, so you can have an idea that it was really an handable machinery that contain, you see here a silicon platform with several electrodes, several cluster of electrodes provided several kind of biosensors. Instead, you see here a normal PCB with, off-the-shelf integrated circuitry that you have combined in order to obtain the right interface. Then, on the other side, we have the Bluetooth communication system, a commercially viable one, and the batteries. Instead, you see here the cap has been designed in a way that you see here tubing. They are actually the inlet and the outlet. When we introduced this cap gently by sliding here, the packaging has been 3D printed with technology of 3D printing, has been built with 3D printing. And when we slide the cap here, the sensor platform was inserted in between just by going in contact with the fluidics. With this system, we have in flux verified the possibility to detect both glucose and lactate, for example, reliably, and we have also emulated the organ failure because the device has been designed for intensive care units. When the organs fail, typically the cells goes to apoptosis, and any cell going to apoptosis typically release enormous amount of potassium. We have emulated the apoptosis in vitro, and you can see here an enormous wave of potassium released by the dying cells. Another point of care application that we have successfully developed in collaboration with the local hospital here in Lausanne is for the detection of the anesthesiology. There are typically several components in anesthesiology, and that's the reason you see here several sensors typically coupled with our electronic interface. And then we have had, wireless communication typically to the software system that once acquired the data on the precise content of the drugs, the anesthesiology drugs components in the patient's blood, were capable to readjust the dose and command then infusion pumps for the next infusion to the patients under the surgery. This is just, a set of data that we have published again in the transaction of biomedical circuit and system. When we can see we have successfully detected the propofol, the paracetamol, and the midazolam, that are 3 out of several components of a typical anesthesiology cocktail. And we have also demonstrated, you see, simultaneous and non-cross-talking detection of the propofol and the APAP in continuous monitoring. A further version of the system I have just introduced you has been developed in the following years. And in this time, we have developed an handable device. You see here one of my former PhD students carrying it. Here the electrode are built in a manner that looks like a surgery needles. So the idea is to use the device to insert directly in the arms of the patients in order to reach the blood, and then measure the anesthesiology components. On board, we have a machine learning signal processing to tackle the problem of the fouling of the propofol on the electrode. And then on the backstage, we have the typical RF communication tool, typically based on Bluetooth or on Wi-Fi. We have exploited both of them to send the communication typically to a visual eye interface. I showed you portable devices. Of course, we have worked as well on wearable devices, having the possibility to collect sweat, typically with a dedicated fluidics on a patch. We can then integrate the patch with typically electrode, and then had, of course, the dedicated electronics for the sensor front end, as well as for the communication RF backend. We have done several times. You see here one example where we have integrated in a typical wearable pocket for mobile phone the electronics we need for the acquisition of data from commercially viable screen printed ceramic sensor. The similar system has been used for measuring on the skin several kinds of molecules, included but not limited to nicotine. We have succeeded in demonstrating the possibility to monitor with these wearable devices heavy smoker and light smoker, demonstrating good correlation with the experimental in vitro, dealing with different concentration of the nicotine. And as you can imagine, the remote monitoring of nicotine is important, especially on those patients that want to stop smoking, but they didn't succeed yet. That was, a project done in collaboration with a company exactly in the market of therapy for enable people stop smoking. This is actually the same PhD student I showed you before with the propofol device on the hands, but in this case, he played the role of the volunteer to test the technology developed by another of my former PhD student, Francesca Criscuolo. She developed wearable devices for measuring components released in the sweat during typically sport exercise, including, but again, not limited to, potassium and sodium that are typically overexpressed under physical exercises. Actually, Francesca also demonstrated the possibility to develop similar system for monitor bipolar disorder patients. Typically, in this kind of patients, the doubt of the doctor is if they have used or not the supply drugs. That is typically the lithium, and we have demonstrated possibility to measure lithium on the sweat of patients with a very good sensitivity and limit of detection. Of course, once we are having all these devices, we can integrate wearable technologies and implantable technology in order to, for example, minimize the size of the implanted devices, and then exploit as much we can the space that is available on the wearable, and have a communication between on top of the skin and under the skin. In this case, we have then also developed, wearable patches. You see here one example that contain typically electronics for the communication, for reading out the data and communication. And you see here an inductive link, inductive coil that provide a link between the patch that may be words, for example, on a shoulder, and the underneath implanted device. Of course, the challenge is on the underneath implanted device. I apologize for how is the slide, which is due to the fact that the animation doesn't work on the system we are using for the streaming. But just to let you know, the system was integrating a receiving coil for the inductive link there were integrated chip inside, and then there were sensors on the top. Here is the realized baby. You see 1, 2, 3, 4 electrochemical sensor. You see here something in between that's actually a temperature meter and a pH sensor. You also see the biocompatible membrane that we have, used to close the chip in order to be biocompatible before to be implanted in mouse. Of course, we have implanted in mice for translational medicine, but the question here is that if ever human will accept this device under the skin, we know that there are already implantable electronics for dramatic diseases like, heart attack, the implantable system that shocked the heart, or we have, pacemaker is one of the first, has been historically introduced on the market, or deep brain stimulation system. But if we speak about just, monitoring of human metabolism, the question is, legitimate. Well, quite recently, a couple of years ago, there has been a survey in Europe that discovered that more than 50% of the European population would be willing to accept to have under the skin implants, small implants, only just to pay in the supermarket. There are RFID that might be already implanted under the skin to be recognized by our machinery. For example, this RFID might be used for paying directly on the machine in shop. So you see, it's something that is coming because it seems the society at large is ready now to accept this kind of implant under the skin. Along this pathway, we have already published years ago. You see here, the guy was published on a sensor journal, a sensor conference in 2012, where we have developed a full system with 5 biosensors on board in the scale of very few millimeters in diameter. The system has been again fully packed with biocompatible membranes in order to satisfy biocompatibility in implantable in humans. Actually, we haven't never done so far, but already Medtronic realized a similar system. You see, inside of 1 centimeter length and few millimeter large, to be implanted under the skin through a syringe, exactly like the passive RFID that we are implanting in our dogs, typically in the neck region, in order to be recognized if we lost the dog on the street by the police. In this case, so our sensor, the sensor that I showed you right before, hosts 5 biosensors on board. This device instead is, for the moment, only an ECG monitor device, but Mark Phelps presented this new device years ago and answered me that they are already working to at least introduce the glucose sensing on board. So you see, injectable by a syringe subcutaneous electronics for monitoring of both electrical and chemical signal, with big player like Medtronic working along this development line. Of course, once we have the options to transfer all of our data on mobile phone or on tablet, we can monitor remotely both disease marker, for example, glucose and lactate related to intensive care unit organ failure, and glucose as well, or related to diabetes, as well as we can measure the drugs, for example, paracetamol as an example of model drug, to follow the therapeutics. We have also demonstrated that once we are on the Wi-Fi, we can also reach the wrists of the responsible of the intensive care unit or the whatever hospital unit, with dedicated alarms that show the name of the patients and the level of the parameter that is out of the safe ranges. Of course, I have showed you portable, implantable, and wearable. What's next? We can ask ourselves what will be the next frontier. along the development of circuit and system for biomedical monitoring of in remote of human metabolism. Well, the next step appear already in literature and seems to be kind of body dust or neural dust or neural dust. So we have seen nowadays several already publications along this line. So what it is the idea to have the possibility to allow people to have in its body kind of smart dust that telemetry send out information. So we can imagine to extend the concept of the smart dust that has been introduced kind of 20 years ago in literature. It was a famous paper by Berkeley, to extend to the body and have smart dust in our body. Of course, we can then imagine to spread this diagnostic dust in a drink and then to have people drinking that, and by drinking, spreading in the digestion system this diagnostic dust, through the digestion system having the diagnostic dust moving to the bloodstream, and then eventually reach, for example, a tumor mass, be linked thanks to a specific binder, molecular binder, to be linked to the tumor mass in order to then provide local telemetry. For doing that, of course, we need to succeed in developing system and circuit that can fly in the bloodstream. So for doing that, we need to cope with the typical size of blood cell. Red cell are up to 30 micron, white cell are up to 30 micron, red cells are below 10 micron. That means we need to develop extremely small sensor, extremely small CMOS electronics, extremely small front end, back end, and provide enough power. So how to do that? Let us have a look in literature to see if we found idea. Well, my colleague Irleman and his group has already published in 2014 this paper on analytical chemistry, possibility to reliably measure the glucose you see down to 5 micron with the electron size, thanks to nanostructuration with nanoplatinum of the working electrode. You see here is nanoflowers. On the side of the CMOS, we need then to scale down to 10 micron. On top, we can deposit the platinum or the gold electrode in order to realize directly the electrochemical sensor on top of the CMOS die. But then we need to find a way to pack in only 10 by 10 micron square area all the electronics we need. So we have started working on that direction years ago, and we have already published in BioCASS 2017 the first design of a potential stat that was 100.24 micron square, so 10 by 10 exactly. Then we have more recently, a couple of years ago, again, BioCASS conference 2022, we have we have published the first layout in collaboration with Politecnico di Torino, my good friend Paolo Crovetti. We have published the first potential stat with area of 23rd micron by 20 micron, including input-output stage. And we have now fabricated this chip, and I hope to be out by the end of the year with also the characterization of the fabricated chip. So a potential stat, so a CMOS front end for an amperometric sensor in, roughly speaking, 20 by 20 micron. What's about the communication? We can eventually move one floor down with 3D integration of chip for the back end. Well, we have tried years ago with the low power OK modulator, but not really succeeding because it's still more than 30 by 30 micron. So we need to do it better. So we have analyzed the problem, and we have seen that the large area consumer components have been the capacitors required by the circuit. So we have moved down instead of 018 micron technology to 28 nanometer node. And thanks to moving to one technology to another, we succeeded in exploiting parasitic capacitors, parasitic capacitances in a transistor, in CMOS transistor. And thanks to this trick, we have used exactly the same or a very similar interface down to only 55 micrometers square of total area consumption. Well, what's about the power transfer? My friends in Berkeley University use typically the ultrasound to stimulate their implantable neurostimulator on the neural dust line, historical line of development. However, they need focusing, and they play with almost 2 millimeter cube neurostimulator. So it's fairly big with respect to the 10 micron I would like proposing you to achieve in order to have free circulating biosensor in human blood. So it seems that with the ultrasound, even though it's a very powerful technique to go deeper in human tissue, it has some problem in focusing simultaneously many floating devices. So it might be better to flood the area with an electromagnetic power carrier. And another good friend of mine, Ralph Etienne Cummings in Johns Hopkins, has already published in 2016 the possibility to have enough reliable receiver in 200 micron by 200 micron inductive coil. So we have done some estimation for application in vitro or in vivo in translational medicine with a mouse cavia, or in application close, for example, to the surface of the human body, for example, in the heart. We can receive enough power based on mathematical estimation by coping with coil that are, around or below 100 micron in size. So having this in mind, we have designed, simulated, and now fabricated and tested our first inductive link that size, targeting initially 150 micron. You see here the guide that has been received in October 22 and that we have already successfully tested. We have now received end of last year, a new chip that is under test now with even smaller coil. But already with the bigger one, we succeed in showing that we can receive, enough power for the power budget we need with our biosensors. And along this line, we have also developed a smarter idea on the power link. Usually, a double coil link is proposed in literature. To improve the received power, literature proposed a third passive link, but we have invented and also patented and published quite recently, last month in January 24, the idea to have an active intermediate link. So we are working with 4 inductor. One coil is the transmitting power, then we have a receiving power, then we have a integrated circuit that shifts the frequency before retransmitting to another layer of the link, where we have a second set of passive layer resonator before reaching the final receiving coil of the small, tiny 100 micron scale implant. So this is just one optical shot of one of our close to 100 micron chip. In this case, was developed for neural stimulation. So you can see here integrated the stimulated electrode directly on the IC, and you can imagine here the receiving coil that I have showed you few slides before. 150 by 150. Well, as I hope to have showed you that, on extremely small sensor, extremely small CMOS front end for the sensor and back end for the data link, we are close to the goal, because we are already demonstrated, at least on design, but we are coming with the real demonstration of the fabrication close to a few tenths of micron. We're still working on the side of the power. As you have seen, we have just published last month this idea of the double frequency, the shifted frequency in transmitting the power in order to be more efficient. And then, of course, we are still away from a real demonstration in application, but I think it will come in the next 5 to 10 years. So by considering all of I have showed you in this last 50 minutes, I hope that we agree that we can consider a deep and intimate integration of biomolecular layer, nanostructured material, and our CMOS devices in order to develop, portable, wearable, implantable, and one day, why not spreadable in form of diagnostic dust device for remote monitoring of human, even at home. So this concludes my talk. Of course, I have an enormous debt of thanks to all my folks. This is a recent shot with the present student, the present generation of students in the lab, but I have to acknowledge all the other generation that followed my research, my crazy idea and research over the last kind of 15 to 20 years. And of course, I thank you all for having listened my talk, and give back the floor to my good friend Ricardo. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Sandro, for this excellent talk in a hot subject. So, to all attendees, if you have any questions, please do it very quickly. I'm seeing no question yet in the chat channel. So, but waiting for questions, I have one. What are the main target technologies, considering that if you use nanotechnologies with a very small transistor, they will be more sensible to radiation effects that are reaching us on the ground, or maybe you prefer to use a more mature technology that are less sensible to this radiation effect. So what are comments about this?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Ricardo. It's a key question, so I really thank you for the question. It's a key question. It's a clever key questions, and the answer, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, depends on the application. So as I showed you, if we target point of care devices that usually may stay, in the size of a portable mobile phone, we can even use very, very old technology. My friend in Imperial College often use 035 micron. I have used it largely 018. Nowadays, it costs almost nothing, block level, and you have enormous amount of space for doing everything you need, even in few millimeters square. So very light and very small. If we are instead, as I'm doing in more recent years, targeting the concept of body dust or neural dust, then we are, 3 orders of magnitude down. And in that case, you have seen, at least in the issue of realizing a data link, we have been getting enormous gain moving from 018 down to 28 nanometer. We have not yet tried for the potential start, but is one of my next goals. And I'm sure that we will gain a lot in terms of both power consumption and in terms of area consumption. So in that case, probably will be really key for win the competition and to succeed in the effort to go down to 28 nanometer or even below.
Okay, thank you. No question yet in the chat channel. Well, So I have another one about the drinkable dust. So you told that you have not yet any experiment or measurement on this. And but what is your expectation about if the dust will really be ejected, or there is the risk of have someone that will stay, or and also in which parts of the body this dust will stay?
Okay, again, thank you, Ricardo. Another very good and challenging question. As you can imagine, we have presented first time this idea in 2017, so now it's already a while that is around. So I've received this question many times, so I have a set of answers. Again, it depends about the application we want to target. I have several in mind. So I have shown during the talk the most difficult one. So in fact, to have a tumoral mass, a tumor mass in an unknown region of a patient's body, and then we need, in that case, to enable this dust to be injected by drinking a solution of the dust, and to pass to the bloodstream. This foresees a very important biological phenomena, which is called internalization. So we have the wall of the gut, we have the dust, and we need a cell that bring the dust and pass the other side in the bloodstream. For doing that, we need to stay close to 10 micron. And then once the drug will be, once the CMOS cube will be circulating, it will reach the tumor mass, and then one day eventually explanted with the tumor mass, or if it doesn't find the tumor mass, it could be ejected by the body, but through the biliary ways. But for that aim, we need to stay close, fairly below 7 micron. Instead, there are other possible applications. So, for example, a friend of mine who is a medical doctor proposed me to use that that technology for example, the colon cancer. In that kind, the particle can even just remain in the digestion tubing of humans, and then, as you can imagine, can stick to the tumor mass if the patient has the colon cancer, and then once again be ejected during the surgery that removed the cancer mass, or simply be evacuated with the solid evacuation that any patient has typically every 24 hours. So you see, depending on the application, in this case, of course, we can even cope with much larger devices. For example, 150 micron might be more than sufficient. So you see, depending on the application, we may have different size or volume constraint. Of course, different power constraint, because we will be deeper or less deeper in the body. But we can, try to at least investigate all these possible applications by exploiting different technologies and different approaches.
Okay, thank you. So I have a question from Natalia Martinez from Imperial College London. Thank you very much, Professor Carrara, for such an interesting talk. I'm wondering if long-term change degradation in the electrode tissue interface can affect compound detection.
Absolutely, yes. We not only affect the compound detection, but also affect the performance of the sensor. There are several different reasons for that, Natalia. One may be the aging of the sensor. If the sensor involve an enzyme, as we have discussed during the talk, the lifetime of the enzyme, of course, affect the lifetime of the sensor. And I can offer you two opposite cases. So with the glucose detection based on glucose oxidase, it has been published in 2011, an experiment on pigs where the sensor survived for 1 year 12 months. I have done experiment, we have done experiment in our lab, and we succeed in showing easily up to 44 days without any problem in glucose detection. I showed you during the talk the detection of drugs, for example, the naproxen. We have tried a similar stuff with the naproxen sensor based on the cytochrome P450. In that case, 15 hours after we have seen the typical decay of the performance of the sensor, typically due to the fact that the cytochrome P450 is developed by mammalians in order to be easily substituted day by day, and that's the reason is a protein designed to survive no more than 1 day. So you see, depending on, again, the application and the kind of biomaterial you put on board, you may have different survival time. In case of brain implants, I know there is a huge interest even in Imperial. I have several friends working on implants. The issue is related to the fact that the hosting body develop tissues on top of the electrode, which is degrading the performance or changing in general the performance of the electrode. If you are interested in this, we have published recently on a CASS journal a paper that showed that in few weeks the performance of the interface changed a lot, and we have characterized how it changed in terms of equivalent circuit, typically for CMOS design.
Thank you. So now a question by Professor Altamiro Suzin from Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul at Porto Alegre. Thanks for the nice talk. What kind of energy source would we try to supply wearable devices other than electromagnetic?
Well, I have to be honest. For wearable devices, we have plenty of options, because being at the surface of the body, we can play, at large in size. And so I have seen, battery on board. We have enough small and enough powerful batteries nowadays. I have worked in collaboration with the nice institute, the Nara Institute of Technology in Japan, with a version of a wearable glucometer where we used the lighting of the lighter of the mobile phone to shine the wearable device. A local solar cell were producing power for the device, and then the device send out an optical signal that has been detected by using the camera, and this optical signal has been coded with the concentration of the glucose. So you see, we can play with many sources. It became much more harder. It became harder answering you if we instead speak about implantable devices, because in that case I have the skin. I have to take care to do not heat up the skin of the patients. I have a limitation in terms of penetration of the signal. So for example, in that case, no way to go deeper with optical signal. I can go a little bit deeper with infrared signal. I can go much way deeper with ultrasound. I can go enough deeper with electromagnetic or inductive. So you see, plenty of options. Again, we need to consider application by application what might be the best. I can close the answer to you by saying that there are plenty of very good review in literature. I remember one published a few years ago in the Transaction of Biomedical Circuit and System, and another one we have published many years ago on a Sensor Journal. But there are plenty of other authors that you can really read if you have any specific target in order to identify the best so far suggested manner to provide enough power to implantable devices.
Thank you, Sandro. So a question by Nathanael Bertamoni from Federal University of Santa Catarina at Florianópolis, Brazil. The fabrication of the chips to implant is made in a different process, or it is the standard one? I wonder about the interaction of the body and materials added to the body.
Well, two questions here. The first one is, yes, we can use standard processes. We have used it actually always or almost always standard CMOS processes. The problem is how to integrate nano and bio, so how to integrate the other two layers. In that case, no standard processes in CMOS fab. So you need to foresee a post-processing step or several post-processing step when you integrate your nanomaterial. For example, as I showed you, electrodeposition on top of CMOS die, directly having inside the CMOS electronics the right functions for the electrodeposition, and then eventually the deposition of the biomaterial that might be done also again by electrodeposition, might be done by spotting, might be done by other technology. About the interaction between body and CMOS material or whatever electronics, I already in part answering to Natalie, if I remember correctly the name. So we will have the tissue of the body that react to the implant and typically create further structure on top of that. In some cases, we can address the issues, as I have showed you, by coating our electronics with fully biocompatible materials. In some other cases, we can't, and then we need to take into account this reaction. We need to characterize, typically electrically speaking, this reaction over time, and then to readjust eventually our signals in order to keep going with a certain sufficient performance of our implanted devices.
Thank you. So I see no more questions. So thank you very much again, Sandro, for the wonderful talk.